If you've ever opened Kentaro Miura's manga Berserk and thought, wait a minute, this is giving me serious Hellraiser vibes, congratulations, you've got a sharp eye. And honestly, it's kinda oddly satisfying realizing two of your favorite horror stories might just share some gruesome, blood-soaked DNA. Both stories have terrifying beings from another dimension, obsessed with pain, power, and messing with humans in the worst ways possible. Barker's Hellraiser gave us the Cenobites, creepy otherworldly creatures. Berserk has the God Hand, equally terrifying, equally twisted. I mean, the evidence is splattered all over his pages. Let's not even get started on Griffith's transformation. It practically screams a Faustian bargain straight out of Clive Barker's playbook. But it's not just about the gore or the existential horror. Both Berserk and Hellraiser deal with something deeper. The fine, unsettling line between desire and destruction, ambition and damnation. So, if you're a Hellraiser fan who hasn't yet read Berserk, consider this your invitation, because in this marvelous video, we're exploring just how Berserk channels the warped genius of Barker's nightmarish vision. Just be ready. Things are going to get rough. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means an awful lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Hellraiser is a 1987 horror film written and directed by Clive Barker based on his own 1986 novella, The Hellbound Heart. While Barker is more widely recognized as an author than a filmmaker, his work in supernatural horror is legendary, and if you're into that sort of thing, his novels are worth checking out. But since the film had the bigger cultural impact, it's more likely to have influenced Berserk. The movie follows Frank, a selfish thrill-seeker who's sleeping with his brother's wife and scouring the world for the most extreme experiences. His search leads him to a mysterious puzzle box that supposedly grants access to heaven or hell. When he solves it, he is immediately dragged into another dimension by the Cenobites, a group of otherworldly beings. In Hellraiser, though, they are explorers of extreme experiences, pushing the boundaries of pain and pleasure into something incomprehensibly sadomasochistic. For them, agony and ecstasy are inseparable, an eternal cycle of suffering so overwhelming that it defies human understanding. Frank's story doesn't end there. He manages to escape back into the physical world, trying to reclaim his body, but the Cenobites aren't the type to let loose ends slide. The rest of the movie follows his desperate attempt to avoid being dragged back to their realm. If you haven't seen Hellraiser, it's a must-watch for horror fans, and personally, it's one of our favorite horror films of all time. The treatment of godlike beings in both Berserk and Hellraiser, which offer power but at an awful cost, is one of the strongest connections. In Hellraiser, the Cenobites are interdimensional beings who serve Leviathan, the frightening ruler of the labyrinth, a place of endless torment. They present themselves as explorers in the further regions of experience, luring victims with the promise of unimaginable pleasure, only to trap them in a horrifying cycle of indescribable suffering. In Berserk, the God Hand is a group of 5 demonic overlords who serve the idea of evil, a force that subtly manipulates fate and reshapes the world to its will. Unlike the Cenobites, who directly inflict suffering, the God Hand works through their apostles, once human beings who sacrifice their loved ones for power. As they lose their humanity and become hideous monsters sworn to serve their new masters, these people gain superhuman strength. Both the God Hand and the Cenobites prey on human desire, offering what seems like a chance at greatness. However, the illusion falls apart the second someone gives in. Instead of freedom, they find themselves trapped in an existence beyond their understanding, forever enslaved to a power that thrives on suffering. One of the most compelling things about the Cenobites, and something Berserk mirrors, is their restrained presence. In Hellraiser, Pinhead is the face of the franchise, gracing every poster and DVD cover, but he's not a typical slasher villain like Freddy or Jason. The Cenobites don't hide in the shadows chasing victims down with a knife. When they appear, it's an event beyond human control. Their presence alone shifts the atmosphere, making it clear that whoever has drawn their attention is completely and utterly doomed. The same principle applies to the God Hand. These beings don't appear unless something monumental is happening. Like the Cenobites, they exist on a level far beyond human comprehension and inspire a sense of inevitability, as if their victims are experiencing something predestined rather than just unfortunate. Like I said, Hellraiser was released in 1987 and Berserk was first published just a year later in 1988. Given how much Berserk was influenced by the pop culture of the 80s, it's no surprise that Miura would draw inspiration from films of that era. In an old interview, he was directly asked what influenced Berserk's world, and he openly mentioned Hellraiser alongside The Name of the Rose. He even acknowledged that fans could probably figure out where his influences came from. He wasn't trying to hide it or pass these ideas off as something entirely original. If you're a horror fan, the connection is impossible to ignore. One of the clearest parallels is the way both Hellraiser and Berserk introduce their otherworldly beings. In Hellraiser, the Lament configuration, a puzzle box, is the key to summoning the Cenobites. It's an object that could fall into anyone's hands, leaving it up to the individual whether or not they want to take the risk and try to open it. Berserk has something similar with the Behelit, but with a major difference. It's not just some random object that anyone can use. The Behelit, a strange flesh-like artifact, is bound to a specific person, fated to arrive at the moment that they're at their absolute lowest. Unlike the puzzle box, which is more about curiosity or recklessness, the Behelit activates when the owner is in utter despair. It doesn't just open a portal between dimensions, it gives its wielder a direct audience with the God Hand. And here's where the real distinction comes in. In Hellraiser, summoning the Cenobites means you're about to be torn apart and experience unrelenting sadomasochistic horror for eternity. No negotiation, no loophole, just plain raw suffering. In Berserk, the encounter comes with a choice. Sacrifice something, or more specifically someone you deeply love, in exchange for power. If you go through with it, you become an apostle, gaining monstrous abilities while forever serving the God Hand. There's also the theme of choice, or at least the illusion of it. In Hellraiser, solving the puzzle box is voluntary, even if the person solving it has no idea what they're getting into. In Berserk, humans make pacts with the God Hand, willingly offering themselves or others in exchange for power. Whether the result is seen as a blessing or a curse depends entirely on perspective. To some, the Cenobites are angels, to others they're demons. The same can be said for the God Hand, depending on whether someone is being sacrificed or ascending as an apostle. To put it simply, both summonings lead to damnation, but in Hellraiser, you have no say in the matter. In Berserk, you make the decision yourself. Another key similarity is that at the heart of both stories lies a man who yearns for more than the world can offer and is willing to sacrifice anything to achieve his desires. Griffith begins as a messianic figure, the leader of the Band of the Hawk. He is admired for his charm, tactical genius, and firm pursuit of his dream, to rule his own kingdom. But fate is cruel. After being imprisoned and tortured to the brink of death, Griffith's dream shatters. His physical form is broken, his voice taken away, his body mutilated beyond recognition. His suffering reaches its peak when he's presented with a choice: remain a broken man, or embrace a higher existence at an unspeakable cost. He betrays his comrades and activates his Crimson Behelit to be reborn as Femto, a dark demigod and a member of the God Hand. But the price? Every single one of his loyal comrades, men and women who would have died for him, are offered as a sacrifice. Griffith doesn't flinch or hesitate at all. He doesn't weep. He watches as the only people who ever truly cared for him are ripped apart, devoured, and defiled by demonic entities. In his new form, Griffith becomes a being beyond human morality. He sheds all weakness and becomes an ethereal, godlike entity. But what remains of the man who once inspired devotion? Femto is pure will, devoid of humanity, embodying power at the cost of empathy. His transcendence is complete, but in his wake, only agony remains. Unlike Griffith, Frank Cotton isn't a leader, but he is a hedonist, consumed by his insatiable lust for new experiences. He has everything a man could want, yet it's never enough. When he hears rumors of a puzzle box that unlocks the boundaries of pleasure and pain, he doesn't hesitate. So, when Frank solves the box, he expects paradise. What he receives is obliteration. The Cenobites don't offer pleasure in the way he imagined. They flay his flesh, rip apart his body, and take his soul to their realm. But Frank escapes. He feeds off the flesh of the living to slowly rebuild himself. With each kill, he sheds a piece of his former humanity, becoming something monstrous. Unlike Griffith, Frank doesn't seek power and is driven purely by personal gratification, a parasite that grows stronger through suffering. Both characters reject their humanity to pursue power, desire, and transcendence, but in doing so, they become monstrous abominations who leave nothing but suffering in their wake. If Griffith and Frank are the ones who seek power, then Guts and Kirsty are the survivors who have been scarred. Guts and Kirsty Cotton may come from vastly different worlds, one a medieval nightmare of swords and sorcery, the other a modern hell of chains and puzzles, but their struggles have broken them. Born from the corpse of his dead mother and raised in a mercenary world, Guts was taught that strength is the only currency that matters, but it was his time in the Band of the Hawk that gave him something beyond survival: brotherhood, purpose, and even love. And then, Griffith shattered it all. When Griffith offers his comrades as sacrifices to the God Hand, Guts is branded with the mark of sacrifice. He becomes demon bait, hunted for eternity. He loses an eye, an arm, and nearly his sanity, watching his lover brutalized before his helpless gaze. On the other hand, Kirsty Cotton's journey begins as an ordinary young woman, but she's dragged into the horrors of the Lament configuration. When Frank solves the puzzle box and escapes hell, he inadvertently pulls Kirsty into the nightmare. Rather than surrender, Kirsty outsmarts the Cenobites, bargaining with them and exposing Frank's deception. Where Griffith and Frank willingly sacrificed others to fulfill their ambitions, Guts and Kirsty fight tooth and nail to retain their humanity. Both characters refuse to become victims, even when the world is stacked against them. Then there are the other members. Slan and the female Cenobite share a basic connection as the only women in their respective groups, but they contrast in execution. Slan is openly sensual, embodying a raw sadistic pleasure and pain, while the female Cenobite appears cold and withdrawn, her torment having shaped her into something more restrained. Ubik from Berserk and Hellraiser's Butterball fit together as well. Both look alike and even have the same exact goggles. Both are grotesque silent figures who don't contribute much verbally, but add to the strange presence of their groups. Next comes Chatterer, who has the same look as Void, with mouth wide open and teeth all bare. Since we've gone this far, let's dig even deeper. There's an infamous omitted chapter of Berserk, chapter 83, God of the Abyss, part 2, where Griffith's transformation into Femto takes him into the Abyss, where he meets the idea of evil. This entity is essentially a god, an omnipotent force that subtly manipulates fate and the world itself. This has a surprising parallel in Hellraiser 2, where we're shown how Cenobites are created. At the center of their world is the Leviathan, a massive floating diamond-shaped structure that rules hell and controls the Cenobites. Both of these beings take on forms that humans can comprehend, even though they're fundamentally abstract. The idea of evil appears as a massive pulsating heart. The Leviathan, with its geometric, unknowable shape, looms over the Cenobite realm. Both act as silent overseers, pulling the strings behind the scenes. That's not all, though. There's another striking similarity. Both entities dwell in maze-like realms meant to reflect the human mind. The Abyss, where the idea of evil dwells, is a conceptual space born from the subconscious of humanity itself. The Leviathan's domain in Hellraiser 2 is a massive twisting maze. In both cases, these beings don't just exist on their own, but are shaped by the collective consciousness of humanity. The Leviathan also has a direct influence on human violence, subtly guiding mankind toward cruelty and destruction. It whispers knowledge of war and weaponry, ensuring that humans continue their bloodshed. This directly aligns with the idea of evil. The more evil exists, the stronger it grows. All it takes is a small push in the right direction. The Leviathan ensures hell is constantly fed with sinners, while the idea of evil thrives because humanity's own darkness gave birth to it in the first place. Both manipulate events from behind the curtain, but ultimately, it's human nature that fuels them. Once the cycle starts, it snowballs, rolling down an endless hill, gathering more darkness along the way. If there's one thing Berserk and Hellraiser understand better than most, it's that true horror isn't just about fear, it's about mutilation and reshaping of flesh. Both Berserk and Hellraiser treat the human body as something malleable, something that can be torn apart and remade into something other. In Hellraiser, Frank Cotton is reduced to a half-rebuilt corpse, his body torn apart by chains and hooks. This is most famously seen in the Cenobites. Their bodies are not merely mutilated, but deliberately altered. Pinhead's iconic grid carved scalp, Chatterer's permanently peeled back lips, and Butterball's stitched up eyes all illustrate that once you cross into their domain, the body is no longer your own. It's a canvas for torment beyond comprehension. The Cenobites see their mutilation as a higher state of being, an enlightenment through agony, proving that in their world, power comes at the cost of flesh. If Hellraiser shows us that the flesh can be remade into something terrible, Berserk takes that idea and runs it through the darkest corridors of the human soul. Apostles often morph into chaotic, disturbing abominations, blending human and animal features into monstrous forms. Then, there's the infamous Eclipse, where Griffith is reborn as Femto, not just changed, but utterly remade into something inhuman. This is Berserk's Hellraiser moment. After his transformation, Griffith, now Femto, discards his old self, beautiful, fragile, and human. What rises in its place is a being of smooth obsidian perfection, completely detached from the flesh and blood existence he once had. Both Hellraiser and Berserk make one thing clear: power leaves its mark on the body, turning mortals into grotesque, suffering creatures. No one emerges unscathed. No one. Marvelous verdict! With Hellraiser, Clive Barker opened the door to a world where pleasure and pain blur into one, and Kentaro Miura kicked that door off its hinges, letting the horrors spill out into the world of dark fantasy. At the end of the day, both works remind us that curiosity doesn't just kill the cat, it flays it, chains it up, and makes it question its life choices. If anything, both prove that the most terrifying beings are the ones who don't need to chase you down. They simply exist, waiting for you to come to them. So, if you ever find a creepy puzzle box or a behelit lying around, maybe don't mess with it, because whether it's Cenobites or apostles, one thing's for sure, no one's handing out happy endings. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe out there, and thanks for watching.